The dream dissolved the way good dreams always do, suddenly, completely, leaving only the emotional residue behind. Manhwa lay in the dark of his small room and tried to hold on to it. He had been Ming Leloi in the dream, a god of lightning standing over a fallen golden dragon, a thunder titan crumbling to dust at his feet. The sky had cracked open with power. He had felt enormous, eternal, unstoppable. Then old Pete's voice shattered all of it. Manhwa, Manhwa, get up. Beast tied. 2 words. He was out of bed before the second one finished. Beast Village knew exactly what to do when the horn sounded. Manhwa had been here long enough to understand that much, even if he was still learning everything else about this world, this body, this life that wasn't his original one. On Earth, he had been an office worker. Unremarkable. The kind of person who moved through the world without leaving much of a mark on it. Here, he was Manhwa, 16 years old, a villager in a settlement built at the edge of the Beast Mountains, in a world where dragons and titans sat at the top of a hierarchy so steep that human beings barely registered on it. Human beings, in the Dragon God Empire, were 4th class. They worked. They served. They died in beast tides. Captain Hades was already at the wall, directing men with the efficient calm of someone who had done this many times. The elderly, the women, the children moved in the opposite direction, toward the center of the village, toward the underground shelter with its massive stone seal. Everyone moved quickly. Nobody panicked. Panic in Beast Village was a luxury they had trained themselves not to afford. Manhwa made it to the shelter entrance, where Uncle Leo was managing the flow of people descending the ladder. The stone that would seal the entrance was already being maneuvered into position. 30 seconds, maybe 40, before it dropped. Manhwa, now. Uncle Leo's voice carried the particular tone of someone who had no patience left for hesitation. Manhwa was about to move when something fell. He almost missed it. A small white sphere of light, barely the size of a marble, slipping from Uncle Leo's person and drifting toward the ground with the lazy confidence of something that didn't expect to be noticed. He stared at it. Then a voice spoke inside his skull. It was cold, precise, mechanical in the way that machines built for a single purpose always sound, efficient to the point of eeriness. Dropped item detected. Collect. Manhwa's body went very still. Uncle Leo was saying something. The words registered distantly, like sound heard through water. Get in the shelter. What are you doing? Move. The sphere sat on the ground and glowed faintly. Is this it? He thought. Is this finally it? He had arrived in this world weeks ago, and he had been waiting. Every story he had ever read about transmigration, about people crossing from one world to another, featured a gift, a system, a power, something to explain why this person and this world and this moment. He had begun to wonder whether he simply hadn't been given one, whether he was just a person dropped into the wrong story without the protagonist's advantage. The sphere sat there and suggested otherwise. He collected it. The warmth was immediate, not painful, not dramatic, just suddenly present, spreading through his chest and down his arms like the first sip of something hot on a cold morning. His body felt marginally more substantial than it had a moment ago, as though a dial somewhere had been turned a single increment. A translucent panel materialized in front of his eyes, visible only to him. He took in the numbers quickly. Physique, 0.5/10. Spirit, 1 out of 10. Numbers that confirmed what he already suspected, that the body he had inherited was about as physically capable as a slightly underweight teenager who had never exercised. The system spoke again. Physique increased by 1 point. He picked up the sphere, and his physique went up by a point. Just like that. Uncle Leo shouted at him again, the kind of shout that had given up on patience entirely and moved straight to survival instinct. And then Uncle Leo dropped another sphere. This one was silver. Manhwa picked it up without hesitating. The sensation was different this time, cool rather than warm, entering through the top of his head and spreading downward, sharpening something behind his eyes. His thoughts snapped into focus with a clarity he hadn't felt since arriving here. Spear increased by 1 point. He looked at Uncle Leo. He looked at the shelter entrance. He looked toward the village gate, where the sounds of fighting had begun. He made a decision that was probably foolish and went toward the fighting. The battle at the gate was organized brutality. About 30 guards held the wall against a horde that pressed against it in waves. Saber-toothed tigers the size of horses, a two-headed vulture with a wingspan that blocked a third of the sky, smaller creatures moving so fast they were more suggestion than animal. Blood on the packed earth. The smell of fear and exertion. Captain Hades moved through it all like weather. His sword glowed yellow, battle energy, the power that separated trained warriors from ordinary people, that made them something more than flesh operating tools. He was level 2, Manhwa knew, the strongest fighter in Beast Village. Watching him work was like watching someone who had made violence into a kind of craft. Manhwa stayed back. He pressed himself against a cart and watched the ground. There, spheres scattered across the bloody earth between fighters. White ones, silver ones, a faint gold he hadn't seen before. He moved when the fighting shifted. Collected. Felt himself changing. Incrementally, steadily, with each sphere absorbed. The warmth and the coolness alternating, physique and spirit both climbing through their respective registers. Get back to the shelter. He looked up. Captain Hades was staring at him, sword raised, expression somewhere between furious and disbelieving. Before Manhwa could respond, the horde shifted. Something large pushed through from the back of it. The smaller creatures scattered instinctively, which told him everything he needed to know before he'd consciously processed what he was looking at. The Firewolf was enormous. Its fur was the color of banked coals, its body radiating heat that he could feel from 30 meters. When it opened its mouth, the air between its teeth was orange. It spat a fireball the size of a wagon wheel. Captain Hades was already moving, sword up, battle energy flaring to intercept. The explosion threw dirt and splinters in every direction. When the smoke cleared, Hades was standing. Barely. That's not a normal Firewolf, Manhwa realized, pulling for whatever Dragon World knowledge came with the body he'd inherited. It's evolved. Firewolf King. Level 2 magical beast. Magical beasts could use magic. That was the distinction that mattered. A regular Firewolf was a large, dangerous animal. A Firewolf King was something approaching a small natural disaster. Captain Hades charged it anyway. Because he had to, because there was no one else, because that was what you did when you were the strongest person in the village and the village needed protecting. The battle was extraordinary and painful to watch at the same time. Both of them moved in ways that made Manhwa's eye struggle to track. Leaping distances that should have been impossible, striking with force that shook the air. But the Firewolf King was regenerating between hits. The yellow glow around Hades' blade was dimming with each block and parry. Then the Firewolf King dropped something. Red. Brighter than the others. Manhwa felt the system's attention on it before he consciously registered it himself. He collected it. Fireball, spell acquired. He stood very still. He checked the spell information. He understood it immediately, completely, the way you understand something that's been downloaded directly into your comprehension. He raised his hand and tried to cast it. Nothing happened. Insufficient mana, the system noted without judgment. He looked at his status panel. Mana, 0. Of course. He had a spell and no fuel for it. He dropped his hand and kept watching. The Firewolf King attacked again. The fireball left a scorched line across the frozen ground. Hades deflected most of it and staggered. Another red sphere dropped. Mana granted. Warmth gathered in his core, different from the physique warmth, more like something kindling. He raised his hand again. His palm tingled. A spark appeared, small and uncertain, then expanded rapidly into something the size of a large fruit, hovering over his fingers and burning with steady orange light. He stared at it. He had made fire appear from nothing. He had done magic. He was a person who could do magic. Then the mana ran out, and the fireball died, and the sudden absence of it left him feeling like he'd set down a weight he hadn't known he was holding. He checked the panel. Mana, null minimal. One fireball he thought slightly stunned. That's all I can afford. He kept watching the battle. More drops appeared. White spheres, silver spheres, the system collecting them continuously. His physique improved. His spirit sharpened. And then, while he was focused on the drops, he heard the system announce something new. Congratulations. Advanced to Apprentice Warrior. He blinked at the notification. Apprentice Warriors were, in the hierarchy of Beast Village, near legendary. People who could fight wild animals with their bare hands. People who had crossed from ordinary into something more. He had just become one without doing a single training exercise. He looked around for something to test it on. A wild boar was charging a guard who'd stumbled. The guard was trying to get up and not going to make it in time. Manhwa grabbed a nearby rake. The guard shouted something warning-shaped. Manhwa swung. The rake connected with the boar's skull. The sound it made was final. The creature dropped, and the momentum of it sliding across the dirt left a long mark in the earth. He stared at the dead boar. He had just killed a large animal with a garden implement. The system awarded him 10 gold coins, a currency it called wealth, apparently, that could be applied toward further development. He was already thinking about what to spend them on when Captain Hades hit the wall. The Firewolf King had caught him with a direct blast. Hades went sideways into the stone, slid down it, and did not immediately stand up. The other guards surged forward, but the fear in their faces was unmistakable. They could delay it. They couldn't stop it. The Firewolf King gathered itself for a finishing attack. Manhwa had 108 gold coins. He spent all of them. 5 fireballs acquired. He raised his hand. The first one formed almost instantly, already larger than the one he'd managed before, and he released it without aiming carefully. There wasn't time for careful. It crossed the distance between him and the Firewolf King in a fraction of a second. It hit the creature's incoming fireball head-on. The explosion was violent enough to knock people off their feet across the courtyard. When the smoke cleared, the Firewolf King was shaking its head, disoriented. Hades was staring at Manhwa from where he'd braced himself against the wall, expressions cycling through several things quickly. "You're a mage," Hades said. "Yes," said Manhwa. "You take it head-on. I'll keep its attention." It wasn't a plan so much as a shared understanding. Two people looking at the same problem from the angles they could cover. Manhwa threw fireballs at the Firewolf King. Not gracefully. He wasn't a trained fighter. He had no technique. He was essentially a person lobbing fire at a large, angry, magical animal and hoping it mattered. But it mattered enough. The creature tracked him, turned toward him, was still turning when Hades hit it from behind like a blade through paper. The sword found the throat. The Firewolf King collapsed. The horde, without its apex predator, lost whatever shared purpose had been driving it. The retreat was uncoordinated and swift. By the time the dust settled, Beast Village was intact. Manhwa checked his wealth. 0 gold coins. He laughed once, quietly, to himself. That evening, Captain Hades appeared at his door, holding a flask of wine he'd apparently acquired from a passing caravan at significant personal expense. He helped himself to Manhwa's roasted boar and poured for both of them. The wine was rough in the way that things are rough when they haven't been refined yet. Harsh enough to make Manhwa's eyes water, but warm going down, and after weeks of dried meat and cold water, warmth was what mattered. "You have a gift," Hades said eventually, watching the fire. "Magic talent. And you were apparently hiding it." "I wasn't hiding it," Manhwa said, which was technically true. "I didn't know." Hades shook his head slowly. "Most people never know because they never will have it. The ones who'd usually find out at the academies, during testing." He looked at Manhwa directly. "You need to go." They talked for a long time after that. About the Dragon God Empire, 15 kingdoms, 48 duchies, for class tiers built around dragon blood and the power it conferred. Pure-blooded dragons at the top, half-dragons below them, humans filling the 3rd and 4th rungs in various configurations of usefulness and exploitation. About the service law that waited for every human at 16, army, mines, or a noble household. No exceptions unless you were a noble yourself, a level 3 mage, or a level 4 warrior. "You're 15, Hades noted. "For about 2 more weeks," Manhwa confirmed. Hades was quiet for a moment. "The Magic Academy enrollment is in August. I'll take you to the royal city." Manhwa looked at the embers of the cooking fire. He thought about the system. He thought about what it could do and what it couldn't do, about all the things it had given him tonight that he hadn't earned through any kind of training, that would vanish the moment he stopped being around drops to collect. He needed knowledge. He needed to understand what he was working with, not just accumulate it piecemeal. The test costs 10 gold coins, Hades added. Manhwa nodded. He would find them. He had a feeling he was going to be very good at finding things. He entered the forest alone, which was, by any reasonable standard, a terrible idea. He had considered waiting for a hunting party. The hunting party had no immediate plans to go out. The beast tide had left plenty of supplies in the village, and nobody felt the urgency. He had considered asking Hades directly, but Hades would have questions that Manhwa didn't have good answers to. So he packed dried meat and a borrowed dagger and went into the magic beast forest at dawn while the village was still quiet. The outer edge was almost beautiful if you could ignore the baseline awareness of danger that pressed on you the way humidity does, constantly, from all directions, never quite resolving. The trees were ancient and enormous, their canopies so thick that sunlight arrived in thin shafts rather than a continuous presence. The ground was layered with decades of fallen leaves that muffled sound and hid things. Enormous ants moved in long, precise lines across his path. Strange caterpillars negotiated their way up tree bark. The underlying complexity of it made him feel small in the way that wilderness always had, even on Earth. He stepped on something soft. Dropped item detected. He looked down. A crushed white grub. The system had noticed it before he had. 2 copper coins acquired. He stared at this information. I can earn money from killing a grub, he thought. I am the most overpowered and also somehow the most mundane creature in this forest. He moved carefully through the brush, tracking for sound and motion. The system announced drops occasionally. Small coins, tiny physique increment from creatures he disturbed without meaning to. Nothing dramatic. The outer forest was manageable, if uncomfortable. Then he found the pigs. 2 of them, bright green with the specific improbability of magical beasts, their scorpion-tipped tails raised and glowing faintly. He recognized them immediately from village knowledge, scorpion-tailed green pigs, which sounded absurd and were actually quite valuable. Nobles apparently considered them a delicacy. 3 to 5 gold coins each. He had no gold coins. He crouched and moved toward them with the careful patience of someone who has decided that consequences will have to be dealt with later. They were occupied with each other, completely inattentive. He reached the appropriate range, picked the angle that the village hunters had always recommended for quick kills, and struck. Both of them efficiently. 8 gold coins acquired. He opened his palm. The coins materialized there, heavy and solid, catching what light filtered through the canopy. He held them for a moment, appreciating the reality of them, then stored them back in the system. This was another feature he appreciated deeply. The system functioned as storage. He didn't have to carry prey. He didn't have to haul anything. He just had to find things and kill them, which was considerably more workable. He kept moving. The giant python was 30 meters long. He found it in a clearing, coiled around a black tiger it was in the process of swallowing. The tiger was the size of a cow. The python was treating it like a meal. The math of this bothered Manhwa in ways that went beyond the specific danger it represented. He was about to back away, carefully, quietly, a tactical retreat dressed as wisdom, when the system spoke. Dropped items detected. He looked. 3 orbs clustered near the python's tail. White ones and a silver one and something green. He moved closer, because he was apparently a person who moved toward 30-meter snakes when instructed to by a disembodied voice. He collected them, the warmth and coolness cycling through him in sequence. And then the green orb resolved into something unexpected. Thorn Vine spell acquired. He had collected magic from the python. The python was a magical beast. The python noticed him. He ran. It was not a dignified escape. He was mostly a function of terror and momentum for the first 30 seconds, crashing through undergrowth in a direction that he hoped was away, which it was. The python's vines, launched with a sound like a whip through water, clipped the space where he'd been standing a moment before. He cleared the bushes. The sound of pursuit stopped. He put his back against a tree and breathed. Thorn Vine, he reminded himself. That was worth it. He was still arguing with himself about whether that was true when he heard the sounds of combat. The group fighting the bloodjade spider was 4 people, 3 men with weapons and a woman with a staff, and the specific focus calm of someone who has been trained to hold spells under pressure. Manhwa watched from cover and collected the drops that the battle scattered without anyone noticing. The spider was red and enormous in level 2, which meant it was powerful enough that the 4 of them were working hard to keep it contained. The woman, Allison, he gathered from the shouting, cast lightning with the precision of someone who had done it many times. The thunder serpent hit the spider, and it buckled. And then one of the men's attacks went slightly wrong, and the spider recovered slightly too fast, and the opening closed. Manhwa had been watching the spider's back, the scorched area where Allison's lightning had already burned through the armor of its shell. He stopped watching and started climbing. It was not, objectively, a good decision. He knew it wasn't a good decision, even as he was doing it. The spider was a level 2 magical beast, and he was a newly minted apprentice warrior. But the orbs were there, and the opening was there, and something in him that was tired of watching from outside had decided. He got onto the spider's back and stabbed it, again and again. At the spine, the spider went violent. He was a small irritation attached to a large creature that had decided to remove him, and the removal process was genuinely terrifying, shaking and twisting that made his entire world into motion sickness and noise. He had one option: system. Exchange all current coins for stamina and strength. The warmth hit him so fast it almost felt like pain, concentrated, rushing, filling his muscles and bones with a density they hadn't had a moment before. He felt himself become heavier and more solid in a way that had nothing to do with weight. Level 1 warrior achieved. He stabbed again, found the spine, applied the leverage he'd seen demonstrated in a nature documentary once, an improbable memory from an improbable past life. The bone cracked. The spider threw him. He hit the ground hard enough to understand why it's described as hitting. The ground does not yield, it pushes back, and the physics of this are not interested in your feelings about the situation. He lay still for a moment, deciding whether anything was broken. Nothing appeared to be. The spider collapsed. Level 2 water toad, monster defeated. 270 gold coins acquired. He smiled at the sky. Allison and the others stared at him with a particular expression of people revising their assessment of a situation that had seemed fully understood. How did you kill it? One of the men, Bobby, who had the large axe and the suspicious frown, asked. Cut its spine, Manhwa said. That's not possible. Its spine is the hardest part. I know. Manhwa considered explaining further and decided against it. Look for yourselves if you want. They did. Bobby checked and found the evidence of what Manhwa described, and afterward the group's manner toward him shifted. Not into warmth, exactly, but into a different kind of attention. The kind reserved for people who have demonstrated they are not simply background. They let him travel with them. That turned out to be, for various reasons Manhwa did not explain, extremely beneficial. The caravan arrived the day after Manhwa returned to the village, drawn by news of the beast's tide. The adults traded fur for salt and argued about prices, and the children ran between the wagon wheels playing games, and Manhwa walked through all of it quietly, collecting drops from the largest crowd Beast Village had seen in a while. 5 extra physique points in an afternoon. He considered this a success. He spent the following weeks more active than he had been before, traveling the outer forest, observing battles when he could find them safely, collecting. His physique climbed steadily. His spirit improved. He learned, from watching Allison, that magic was divided into 2 foundations: mana, which was the energy that powered spells, and mental strength, which was the mind's capacity to shape that energy. Both required meditation to develop through practice. He couldn't meditate. More precisely, he had tried, many times, with increasing levels of frustration. The process required sensing the magical elements in the world around you, feeling their presence, drawing them in, refining them into something your body could use. Every mage he'd talked to described it as obvious once you had the talent. You simply felt them. They were there, and you reached out, and they came. He felt nothing. He sat in the forest with his eyes closed and his breathing regulated and his concentration as focused as he could make it, and the magical elements of the world declined to make themselves known to him. No magical talent, he concluded. I can use magic because the system gives it to me. That's not the same thing. He filed this disappointment next to several others and kept moving. The month before the enrollment test, Hades gathered the group for the journey. Manhwa and 3 children from the village who had scraped together 10 gold coins each through what must have been significant family sacrifice. Joanna, pretty and quick and nervous in the way that intelligent people are nervous when stakes are high. Joseph and Andrew, 2 boys who had grown up alongside Manhwa in the small geography of Beast Village and were now discovering, in the way that young people often do, that the world outside was larger than they had imagined. The ox cart took 5 days and was genuinely uncomfortable. By the 2nd day, the children had stopped chattering. By the 4th day, they had stopped pretending to be excited. By the 5th day, they were just enduring it, which is its own kind of accomplishment. Fire Dragon City announced itself first as noise and then as scale. Manhwa had lived in cities on Earth. He knew conceptually what a city was. But the capital of the Fire Dragon Kingdom was built on thousands of years of accumulated power and intention, and the result was something that didn't translate to his previous experience. The streets were wide and paved with material that held the light differently than stone. The buildings were ornate in ways that suggested the ornamentation was functional, not decorative. And everywhere, dragon people, some with horns, some with wings, some with tails or scales or combinations he hadn't imagined, moving through the city with the ease of people in their natural environment. Joseph and Andrew walked with their shoulders curved inward, looking at the ground more than the buildings. Manhwa walked with his head up, cataloging. The drops were everywhere. Dragon God Square was vast and loud and full of the specific anxiety of people whose futures were about to be decided. Manhwa collected his way through the crowd while the children waited in line, feeling himself improve in small increments with each passing minute. The test itself was simple in design and brutal in implication. A crystal ball for element affinity. The sphere responded to whatever magical affinity a person carried, glowing in the relevant colors, if any existed at all. A mental strength meter for the second component. Most people left the crystal ball dark. Joanna's lit up green with streaks of gray, wood and wind, medium quality and low quality respectively. Enough. Her mental strength registered at 8 times her peers, enough to qualify. She burst into tears. Then she laughed. Then she grabbed Manhwa's arm. When Manhwa placed his hands on the crystal ball, he didn't know what to expect. What happened was that the ball became a small sun. Silver light poured through it from whatever was inside, crackling with tiny arcs of energy, filling the space around it with the specific quality of air before a storm. Everyone within 20 meters took a step back involuntarily. Lightning, the middle-aged examiner said softly. Superior level. The word superior moved through the crowd the way rumors do, faster than intended, changing shape as it traveled. By the time it reached the back of the gathered observers, people were saying things that could not possibly be accurate, and yet turned out to be. The mental strength test confirmed it. The red line climbed past the point where other people had stopped, kept climbing, reached the top of the scale, and pressed against it like something that had found a wall it didn't know was there. 100 times peers, the examiner said. His voice had gone slightly unsteady. Elemental affinity, superior lightning. Mental strength, 100 times. Overall evaluation, exceptional. 3 old men in magic robes materialized from nowhere, nearly knocking each other over, and immediately identified the wrong person. The Fire Dragon Magic Academy had been there for 20,000 years. Manhwa stood at the entrance and considered this number. The oldest university on Earth was less than 1,000 years old. This place had been operating for 20 times that. Generation upon generation of students had passed through the same gate. The stone of it had been worn smooth by centuries of hands and feet. The trees along the main avenue were not old in the human sense. They were old in the geological sense, their trunks so wide that 5 people couldn't encircle them. He had chosen the Fire Dragon Academy over Douglas Academy for the simple reason that the old man with the red nose had offered better terms. 5,000 gold coins in annual scholarship. Full tuition. The badge that now sat on his chest, pulsing faintly with gathered lightning elements. He had also, at significant personal expense, enrolled Joseph and Andrew in a mid-tier warrior academy. 200 gold coins that had left his reserves considerably reduced, but had transformed two boys' expressions from hollow to something approaching hope. The chubby boy, Hart, full name apparently not something he led with, found him on the first day in front of the statue gallery and immediately decided they were friends. Hart was short and round and possessed 3 separate magical affinities at excellent levels, which his grandfather apparently considered a calling and Hart considered a burden. He talked constantly and with enthusiasm about everything except whatever he was supposed to be talking about, and Manhwa found, to his mild surprise, that he didn't mind this. Daniel came with Hart, a handsome boy with the easy social grace of someone raised to be liked and the underlying sharpness of someone who had learned to make that useful. The 3 of them had dinner together, and by the end of it had somehow established the kind of understanding that usually takes much longer. His roommate, Abe, was cold in the specific way that people are cold when they are protecting something, and had come from the imperial capital for reasons he did not share. Manhwa respected the distance. He spent his mornings in class learning what magic actually was, not just how to use it, but its underlying logic. The way elemental energies behaved, the principles that governed how a mind could shape them, the grammar of spells. He discovered, extremely good at absorbing this. Whatever the system had done to his mental strength made information sit differently in his mind. It landed and stayed and connected to other information without requiring repetition. He spent his afternoons wandering the campus. This was observed and discussed. The teachers knew about it. The students knew about it. The general consensus was that it represented a tragic waste of exceptional talent.